All right, so good morning and welcome to this virtual roundtable organized by Liquid Gas Europe, the European LPG Association. My name is Frédéric Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv. We're an online media specialized in EU affairs, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's virtual roundtable, which is titled Towards 100% Renewable Gaseous Solutions in Off-Grid Areas. Now, today's discussion will cover a wide range of topics related to the LPG sector. We will hear, for example, about the different pathways to make LPG entirely carbon-free and renewable by 2050. And then we'll have a panel discussion where we will focus, we'll discuss the different applications of LPG and how different countries are using it in areas like transport and heating, but also in industrial applications. There will be opportunities as well for the audience to put questions to the speakers, so don't be shy and prepare your questions in advance. You can put them directly in the chat here on Zoom, and I will take as many of them as possible later on. But before I introduce the speakers, let me first give the floor to Eva Abramiuk-Lété, General Manager of Liquid Gas Europe, for some opening remarks. Eva, the floor is yours.
Dear participants, on behalf of Liquid Gas Europe, I would like to welcome you to today's event. Many of you might wonder why Liquid Gas Europe is discussing today's topic, which is 100% renewable gaseous solutions in off-grid areas. Well, we believe that achieving this target is possible. Let me first start by describing what LPG is. LPG is a gaseous fuel which today delivers air quality and greenhouse gas improvements in many applications. It is also known as propane or butane, and it is used in heating, mostly in off-grid areas, in transport, in industrial applications, and for many more purposes. In fact, there are more than 1,000 applications for LPG today. LPG can be produced in various ways. It is either a co-product of natural gas and oil extractions, or production, or it can be produced from biological sources or renewable electricity and CO2. During today's webinar, we will focus on how to ensure that off-grid areas, transport, as well as industry can benefit from renewable LPG and other renewable gases such as rDME. What all those renewable gases have in common is that they are all clean burning and that they can decarbonize a variety of sectors. bioLPG is identical in use and performance to conventional LPG, and can lower its carbon footprint up to 80% depending on the feedstocks used. rDME can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 85% compared to diesel and heating oil. Its use also significantly improves air quality. These fuels are therefore perfectly placed to immediately help reach Europe's climate goals, especially in rural areas and road transport. The European Union has set ambitious targets on the road to carbon neutrality. But for these climate goals to become a reality, we need the right policy landscape in place. Today's debate will shed some light on benefits of renewable gaseous fuels, as well as which policy framework can help for these fuels to flourish. I wish you all a very interesting debate. Please do post your questions at any time in the chat, through the chat function. Thank you very much, and Frederick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eva, for providing this introduction and overview of the LPG sector and renewable gases more generally. Let me give now the floor to Eric Johnson, Managing Director of Atlantic Consulting, who will give us a presentation about pathways to 2050 using bioLPG and renewable DME. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva and Frederick. And just to check, you can see my screen, I presume?
Yes, we can see your screen very well.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you for the introduction and good morning to all. I'm here to tell you about a study that I led for Liquid Gas Europe. And its aim was to figure out how renewable the LPG industry could be in 2050. So in the next 10 minutes or less, I'd like to tell you what we found, how we calculated that, and then go into some detail on the pathways to bioLPG. And that detail shows that bioLPG is not just a dream, it's already a reality, and there are a number of projects that prove it. Before all that, let's do one slide to remind ourselves what is bioLPG. bioLPG is the same thing as LPG. It's the same thing as fossil LPG. It just comes from different sources. So bio comes from, well, bio, trees, straw, other biomass, and also from waste, and also from windmills and solar and so on, which I realize are not bio as such, but they're all renewable. And then fossil LPG, of course, comes from oil and gas. Whatever, it's actually the same fuel. There's no need to change the infrastructure for distribution and consumption of the bio against the fossil. And that makes decarbonization easier, and it also saves loads of money. So now that we know what bioLPG is, here's the question that we try to address, is how much of European LPG demand in 2050 can be supplied by bioLPG? And the answer is, and you'll have to wait for it because I need to advance the slide, all of it. That's right, all of Europe's LPG demand in 2050 can be supplied by bioLPG. Now I realize you could respond that the LPG industry would say that, wouldn't they? But this is actually what these sources are saying. You see the box on the left, that shows the main sources of our scenario. It's all the names you might expect: the European Commission, the International Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy Agency, plus others among the great and good in energy forecasting. Konkawi, one of the others, was particularly rigorous and helpful. So to answer our question, we drew on those sources, and first we developed a demand scenario for 2050. Then we developed a supply scenario to supply that demand. And we believe that we looked at all the existing studies that are relevant, and there's a lot of them. We drew on these because first, they're authoritative. Secondly, that aligns our work with existing work. And thirdly, we did not want to reinvent any wheels. So in the supply scenario, we drew most heavily on the modeling of biorefineries that's been done by Konkawi, and the modeling of biogas done by Eurogas and Navigant. And both the biorefinery and the biogas scenarios were based on feedstock availability that has been worked up by IRENA together with the IEA. By the way, all of this is public information, so you can back calculate it as much as you like or forward calculate it and see what kind of results you get. So as I said, the first thing we worked out was a scenario of demand. And what we found is that demand is falling. The LPG industry knows this already, because when boilers are replaced or built new, consumption of the new one is almost always less than the old one, usually by quite a bit. This is all about efficiency of boilers, of buildings, and of heat management. Now, adding to this decline in the coming 3 decades are another 3 factors. There's the rise of electrification, there's the resulting decline to some extent of gaseous fuels, and there's basically the death of solid fuels, better known as coal. I mean, really, the projections are generally that coal will disappear in the next few decades here. So we'll go to the next slide and look at how that demand could be supplied in a decarbonized world. What the Konkawi model projects for Europe in the Green Deal scenario that we used is a major increase in 3 renewables pathways that are shown here in the slide. There's biorefining, there's gasification and pyrolysis, and then there's power to X. And we added to this another pathway that the LPG industry has found in its own investigations, and that will be biogas conversion. Now, I'd advise you to remember these because they're all really important, and they're real today. This isn't science fiction, this is science fact. But let me come back to that, because first I want to show you the heart of what we found, the heart of our study, really. These 4 pathways can lead to 100% bioLPG in Europe in 2050. Now, the supply sources are shown in this waterfall graph from left to right. They're the same sources you saw in the previous slide. Now they just have the quantities assigned to them. The critical point here is that 100% renewable is possible, even in a high demand or a low demand scenario. The supply from biorefining, gasification and pyrolysis, and power to X is enough to meet the 2050 low demand case for LPG. That's the red horizontal line that you see going across there. Now, if you throw in biogas conversion, it is more than enough to meet the high demand case, and that's that yellow line going across horizontally there on the graph. Now, as I already noted, this is not just the view of the LPG industry. It's the distilled view of the energy authorities, named mainly 4 of them. That would be the European Commission, the IEA, IRENA, and Konkawi. Now, I'd like to spend the rest of my time talking a little bit, putting some meat on these bones. I'd like to show you some examples of these pathways, ones that exist already today. Now, the first one of these is biorefining of lipids, and that is already very much mainstream. Refiners have realized that in order to decarbonize, they can shift from refining petroleum to refining renewable lipids. And this map shows the action so far in Europe. You could do a similar map for the refiners in the US, which would show a lot of activity also going on. The big product so far is biopropane, which is a drop-in replacement for propane, the main constituent of most LPG. Now, in 2015, production capacity for biopropane in Europe was zero, nothing. Today, it is about 300,000 tons a year, and by 2026, it will climb to around 430 kilotons, and something like that. And globally, it will climb by that time to about 1.5 to 2 million tons. These are enormous growth rates in these kinds of industries. The next pathway is what we call Power to X. Now, this has progressed more quickly than I or anybody else I know who works in this area thought was probable even just a year ago. The picture here is a project that's led by Siemens that will start up later this year. It will make about 10 kilotons a year of renewable LPG. Now, they take renewable power from wind, and they use that to convert water and air into hydrocarbons. Now, I know that sounds crazy. That sounds like science fiction, but it's not. The chemistry is actually pretty straightforward. There's another Power to X project in planning, which is the so-called energy island that will be off the coast of Denmark. As the name suggests, it will actually be on an island. And by 2026, it will aim to produce about 25 kilotons a year of renewable LPG. Now, I know those are not enormous numbers, but as I say, this is happening a lot quicker than I would have said a year ago, and I think most people would have said a year ago. So, I mean, we weren't thinking it was going to get commercial until the 2030s. The next one on the list, or the next two on the list, really are gasification and pyrolysis, which are somewhat similar pathways. They're not quite as far down the curve, but they are moving along. In gasification, we have Enerchem, which is planning a huge plant in Rotterdam. In pyrolysis, there's an outfit called Pyrocell in Sweden, which will turn sawdust into fuel. And there are also trials going on at 3 or 4 locations with cat crackers, which are very common in typical petroleum refineries. And these can crack pyrolysis oils and get a 10% yield of biopropane. That's a lot, 10%. Now, last and definitely not least on the list is the conversion of biogas. Now, biogas production is booming, as you probably know, but most biogas does not go to the conventional grid for natural gas, not least because that can be pretty expensive. So a lot of people out there are trying instead to convert biogas into a liquid hydrocarbon, and that could be propane or butane. Now, this is not yet gone commercial, this kind of biogas conversion, but you've got some big credible names like the one shown here that are trying to make it work. And usually when that happens, well, it does in time. It's just a matter of working at it and making it happen. Now, before I close, I would just like to note that what we have shown here, those projects are real, but what I showed you is the projection. This is a scenario. It's not a forecast. It's not a year-by-year forecast. It is a possible picture of the future. This is what could be, according to Konkawa and other authorities. It is not what shall be or must be. And we also do not presume that progress will be linear. Well, like I say, this Power to X thing, this has come along a lot more quickly than we would have thought even a year ago. But what we can say, based on today's knowledge, in the short term, commercial growth will be focused first on lipids. And then I think what comes next is actually alcohol to jet, which is not even in the scenario. And then there's Power to X, which is coming much faster than we thought only 6 months ago. This whole thing is very, very dynamic. On the final slide, you will see my email address. If you would like to ask questions or share your thoughts or talk about this or whatever, please feel free to drop me an email. I look forward to hearing your views if you would like to talk about it more. And I look forward to the journey towards decarbonization. And I thank you very much for listening. Back to you, Frederick.
Thanks, Eric. And so I understand that you'll be staying on for the discussion, which is about to start now. And your presentation was indeed a very good introduction to this panel discussion, where we're going to look at the different uses of LPG across Europe, or some key European countries, but also looking at the future perspectives of the sector, which is, as you pointed out, renewable. So to discuss this topic today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Joël Pedessac from France Gaz Liquide, the LPG trade association in France, Maria Malmkvist from Energigas Sverige in Sweden, Jobst-Dietrich Diercks from Deutscher Verband Flüssiggas in Germany, Lizzie German from Demeter, they're a producer of LPG based in the Netherlands, but operating globally. And Beth Reed from UGI International, also a producer of LPG operating globally. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us today. There will be no introductory speeches or anything. We'll dive straight into the conversation. Just one reminder for the audience, if you'd like to put a question to the speakers, just use the chat function on Zoom, and we will take their questions towards the end of the conference. So to get the conversation started, let me turn to you, Joël Pedessac, for an overview of the LPG market in France. So, Joël, tell us about the usage of LPG in your country currently. How is the market structured right now? And how does LPG help in any way in achieving environmental objectives of France?
Hello, everybody. So I'm Joël Pedessac from France Gaz Liquide, as you said, speaking from Paris today. The actual market for France is quite stable, even if the auto gas market is growing because of the sharp demand from the automobilists in the case of the increase of the price of gasoline or diesels. On the market, we are facing to some difficulties with the government, which is pushing hardly the electrification of all the usage, as you know, in the transport sector, but also in the heating of household sector. We have a new regulation in place for new buildings constructions, which name is RE 2020, and which help the electricity to take the place of all energies in the building sector, the new building sector. So we are looking at the biogas and the biopropane as one of the solutions to replace fuel in the household where we are refurbishing this building. And there is this is our main sector where we can wait for growth of demand by replacing heating oil. Heating oil, we can replace heating oil firstly with the fossil propane, but as we saw before, that because biopropane is a drop-in solution in the years to come, and as from today to 2030, we can replace part of the fossil propane by biopropane. We have today one biorefinery, a total one, which is producing biopropane in the south of France. We are waiting from another biorefinery. As from 2024, it will be also a propane total refinery, which will replace the refinery of oil. So this is the actual situation. We have some volumes of biopropane, which can reduce by 80% of the CO2 emission of fossil propane, mainly in the transport sector. Autogas is growing by 50% this year. And we hope that it will be the case in the heating of household sector also.
Thanks, Joël Pedessac. We'll have a question after that about future perspectives. But let me turn now to Maria Malmkvist with a similar question about the LPG market in Sweden. How is it structured at the moment? What are the main users in your country? And how significant is the contribution of LPG in helping Sweden reach its environmental objectives?
Thank you very much. And I'm glad you tried to say Energigas Sverige. It's not easy in Swedish, but it's the Swedish Gas Association. And I'm also working together with Liquid Gas Europe since I'm the vice president at the moment. So I do appreciate being here. In Sweden, we use LPG mainly for the industry. And if we have a total use of gases around 14 terawatt hours, we have like 4 to 5 terawatt hours LPG in Sweden. And it's mostly used to produce steel and metal, pulp and paper in the chemical industry, and also for food production. And in Sweden, we do not use LPG in the heating sector or in the transport sector. So in that way, we differs a bit compared to the other panelists, and also to the people that are listening, I think. And since you can gradually switch from LPG to bioLPG, of course, the transition can be done over time. And the infrastructure are there, and the equipment are there. So now the most important task is to produce more bioLPG. And as Erik Johnson said, there is a huge emission reduction potential and air improvements that can be reached by using LPG. So let me give you just some examples. We have the change has already started from the fossil-free industry towards the fossil-free industry with small amounts. If I could just give you 2 examples, we have a company that uses bioLPG in the production. One is Löfbergs Lila that has started to roast their coffee beans with an amount of bioLPG 5 years ago already. And since 1 year ago, they are using 100% bioLPG. The other one is Rexel Tissues and Airlace Paper Mill, which is a subcontractor using 100% bioLPG, subcontracted to Duni, I'm sorry. They are the first paper mill in the world to try to dry paper with blending of bioLPG. So this is some examples of the transition from LPG to bioLPG. And we also have, of course, an increased demand for bioLPG from the private sector that is using LPG for barbecues in caravans and other similar appliances. I don't know if I answered all your questions, or did I miss anything?
I think it's a good start. It's a good overview. So thanks for keeping it relatively brief. There'll be, of course, opportunities for you later on to look forward at potential new uses or applications in Sweden. Let me turn now to Jobst-Dietrich Diercks with same question than to the other speakers. Can you just please give us an overview of the LPG market in your country, Germany, and what benefits does LPG bring to the environment in Germany?
Yeah, thank you, Frederick. How diversified our industry is quite obvious when you compare Sweden with Germany, because in Germany we have a different focus compared to Sweden. In Germany, the majority of LPG is used in domestic and commercial heating, in the off-grid areas being mostly in rural areas. So LPG is very often a substitute for heating oil and coal, and quite often even for electricity, because we have still some heating equipments in Germany that are supplied by electricity. And as everybody knows, this is actually the most expensive energy source that one can use. And despite the energy crisis due to the Ukraine war, LPG still is a relatively affordable energy compared to electricity. BioLPG will be the game changer, in my point of view, for the German off-grid areas, because we will have a new regulation as of 2024, where 65% of every new heating installation obligatory needs to use 65% of renewable energy. As of 2024, 65% renewable energy is obligatory whenever you exchange a heating equipment, being it a new building or an existing building. So the only chance for our industry to cope with this regulation is that we can offer to politics a kind of hybrid solution, being a mix of modern technology, being a condensing boiler, micro CHP, together with a blending of fossil LPG with bioLPG, be it a 30% to 40% mix, plus photovoltaic or solar panels on the roof. This is a solution that could meet the 65% target, and this would keep us in the game for the future energy transition in Germany. So for us, bioLPG is an extremely important development in the industry. And we really are very happy that the production is picking up, like Eric told us, in the coming years, and even until 2030, we believe that we will be able to offer to our customers a 20% blend, to all our customers in Germany, a 20% blend with bioLPG, going up to 100% in the year 2050. So we are optimistic, and we need the political support, which we will address later on in this virtual conference. Thank you, Frederick.
Thank you, Jobst-Dietrich. Let me turn now to Lizzie German for a producer perspective. So, Lizzie, with LPG, we're talking still about a relatively niche market, I understand. So how is that market currently supplied at the moment, and what are the opportunities looking forward?
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. So I'm speaking today, and thank you for your introduction, and warm welcome from Daimler, which is a joint venture company between SH Energy and UGI, specifically focused on scaling up the supply and the market for renewable DME, which is a renewable gaseous fuel that can be used in the LPG sector that is a slightly different molecule to biopropane. So talking today specifically about renewable DME, which offers the opportunity to expand the range of renewable gaseous fuels available to the LPG sector. This can be used in the LPG sector either as a blend with LPG or with bioLPG. Up to around 20%, it can be dropped into existing infrastructure with little or no change to that infrastructure. Above around a 20% blend, up to 100% rDME, it can be used with some small changes to infrastructure. It can be transported as a compressed gas, the same as biopropane, and it can be used by the customer in the same way that they currently use LPG. So we see an important role for renewable DME in expanding the scope of renewable fuels that are available to the LPG sector. And as you said in your introduction, Daimler is a company based in the Netherlands, but that operates globally. So unlike Jobst and Joël, I don't bring a country-specific view, but we see the role of renewable DME as being important across the countries, across the European countries, particularly in terms of its use as a drop-in fuel, which has advantages for customers not having to change their infrastructure in the same way as bioLPG, and then allowing some customers to get to much higher blends of renewable fuel as we're looking to 100% renewables in 2050. And it can be used across the different sectors. So, for example, in Sweden, when we talked about the high proportion of industrial customers, that can be a customer for renewable DME, and also in Germany, where there are the domestic customers living in rural areas. So we see an important role. It will be different in different European countries according to the existing LPG markets there. And I look forward to explaining a little bit more on the supply side in your later questions.
Thanks, Lizzie, for explaining. And let me turn now to Beth Reed, also for a producer perspective or supplier perspective. So how is the market supplied currently, Beth? And I believe maybe you know some of these markets better than others. And what are the opportunities looking forward as you see them?
Thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this really important debate introducing the context of how we enable thousands of homes and businesses and industries who live and work off the gas grid to be part of the green transition, as many of my colleagues have already described this morning. Just to explain a little bit of background, UGI International is a downstream marketer of energy solutions, including LPG, predominantly to energy segments off the gas grid. We operate in 17 countries across Europe, servicing the process and heating energy needs of thousands of those households and businesses. In fact, as a marketer, a downstream marketer, we are committed to a progressive journey towards climate neutrality, in line with the expectations of the EU's 2050 goals. Importantly, by decarbonising the products we provide to our customers. We see as a marketer the need to engage ourselves more fully in the end-to-end supply chain. Commonly as a marketer today, we buy the product LPG that we supply to our customers, typically from refineries or gas processing plants. As we see the move towards the future, and has just been described by both Eric and Lizzie, we see the need to introduce new pathways to develop the renewable fuels that we will utilise to service our customers and commit and deliver our decarbonisation journey. So as a marketer, we're actually making a transition to be a marketer and also an investor in production. We're already conducting investments across Europe. Lizzie just talked about Dymeter, which is a very important joint venture relationship between UGI and SHV Energy. And using some of these investments in production facilities for renewable DME or bioLPG, through the different technologies that have been spoken about, we intend to be able to offer low carbon gaseous products to our customers to enable them to be able to make the transition that otherwise they may not be enabled to make. Thank you, Frederick, for the opportunity to make that first response.
Thanks, Beth. And so to get another view on how the market is supplied, let me go back to Eric Johnson. So for somebody like me who's external to the industry, probably doesn't understand as much of it as you do, LPG does appear like a relatively niche market in the energy and fuel sector overall. So what are the opportunities looking forward as you see them? Do you see LPG really becoming a big player in the coming decade or so, or do you believe it will continue being a niche player?
My guess would be that the position of it today, I think it's somewhere around 3% of energy supplies, something like that. And so I'm not sure that would change any dramatically over time. But although 3% might seem kind of small, and it is small in proportion, it's a pretty big industry, you know, because the overall energy industry is absolutely enormous. I think maybe the biggest wild card that we have right now is the situation in the Ukraine, and that has completely turned energy markets on their head. Which, but to some extent, this idea of getting less dependent on Russian energy was already in the cards. It's probably just made this all the more clear that it needs to happen and speeded it up. I think this actually potentially opens up some opportunities for LPG, because at least in Europe, the dependency on Russian gas is much greater than the dependency on Russian LPG. There's actually there is some amount of LPG supplied by Russia, but not very much. And so it actually opens up some opportunities because there's lots of LPG in other parts of the world that can come in and be supplied here.
Okay, thanks. A quick follow-up maybe. So I understand that the heating and transport market are probably the most promising looking forward. I mean, you did mention Russian gas, which is heavily used currently in heating across Europe. So do you see these areas also as the most promising looking forward?
Yes, I mean, well, those are traditionally the markets. I mean, the biggest market is for heating, and that would be heating and cooking, you know, space heating, industrial heating, but also cooking. The transport market is primarily in automobiles, you know, they call it auto gas. And so those will likely be the ones going forward. There are a bunch of other applications, things like drying agricultural products and things like that, but and actually propelling aerosols could be kind of an interesting niche for low carbon product. But I don't think offhand that the split of that is going to change dramatically. The key is, though, that what we mentioned before, the idea about renewable propane, for instance, being a drop-in fuel, that unlike some of the other renewables out there, you know, you can just put it in the network and nobody really notices. It just flows the way the fossil stuff did. And that saves a lot of time, energy, and money for everybody in the supply chain.
Okay, thanks, Eric. That was very useful for me. Let me turn to Joël Pedessac now for questions about the applications for renewables, renewable and bioLPG. So how do you see that developing in France specifically? So I understand heating and transport potentially are the most promising. So how do you see demand in those sectors evolving in France?
As you said, or as you heard before from Eric and the other people speaking, that the bioLPG can be used in every type of equipment which is using gas already. This is a drop-in solution, and we can put 2%, even 100%. There will be nothing to change in the equipment. We, as I said before, the main type of usage you can see here in France is in the domestic sector for heating household, because we will have a regulation as from next July, which will forbid the replacement of heating oil, heating system by a new one. So that means we will have in the remote area where there is no natural gas grid, where it's quite difficult to replace heating oil with a heating pump, that there will be a room for using propane and even biopropane, of course, because with the biopropane we will reduce by 80% the footprint of this kind of usage. So this is for us the fact that the heating oil will be forbidden as from July. It's a huge opportunity to replace that kind of equipment. In the transport sector, it's another thing. We have 1,500 filling stations distributing autogas already, and we have already in some station the distributor which are dropping 8 to 10% of biopropane. So this is already on the side of the transport sector. We have already biogas in this segment, and I think it will be increasing as far as the product will be more available on the market. I speak about one refinery already. Within two years, a second refinery, biorefinery, which will produce this kind of gas, and it will be the opportunity for the distributor to increase the share of biopropane. We are targeting in 2030 to have 30% of our total sales using this kind of biogas.
Okay, thanks very much, Joël. Beth Reed, I think you wanted to intervene and maybe say a word about electrification on the one hand and the use of renewable and liquid gases on the other. So Beth, you have the floor.
Yes, of course. I think we've got the benefit of seeing some of the questions coming in the chat, and there was a question particularly about the electrification versus, I'll use the phrase renewable liquid gases. One thing that I'd just like to bring is the context of our end users, our customer base, the people that we service. they're off the gas grid, and in those rural communities where these homes and businesses are, typically the building stock, the framework within which the heating is produced, or indeed some of the processes that have been spoken about, don't lend themselves well from an affordable or effective electrification solution solely. Although it can be technically feasible, what needs to be recognized is that the cost to transfer to other low carbon heating or process solutions, such as electrification or alternatives for these off-grid users, can be very complex and can be very costly. That's where we're servicing the market today. And as my colleagues have spoken about in the discussion, the strong benefit of renewable liquid gases is that they are drop-in solutions for these users off the gas grid that are already using LPG, that can then meet and join the green transition by taking these new fuels into their supply chain as they convert at an affordable rate. And I think that's really specific about the fuels that we're discussing versus the broader, more complex market of electrification.
Thanks, Beth. And so let me turn back to Maria Malmkvist for your perspective about future applications for bioLPG or renewable gases in Sweden. Currently, the uses are mostly in industry, you said. So do you see any opportunity there in the future for other sectors like heating and transport, for example?
In Sweden, I think we will stick to use the LPG and bioLPG in the industry, and in the industry it's very important. We haven't got any oil in the not a lot of oil. We have changed it with other sources like LPG. So for the industry, I think LPG is very important, and I cannot see that we will change. We have a district heating and power, and in the transport sector, in Sweden we talk a lot about electricity and hydrogen as is in the rest of Europe, and of course we also use biomethane in the transport. So I think the importance of LPG will stay in the industry.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Let's go to Germany now with Jobst-Dietrich Diercks. So same question to you. Which applications do you see developing in the future in your country?
Yeah, first I would like to support Beth in her statement that we need technology open solutions for the customers that we serve, that our industry serves, that we have to offer alternatives to the all-electric society. We see the same development in Germany, where politicians are really following the mainstream, and they dream of an all-electric society supplying 40 million households for heating purposes only by electricity. And we believe that the alternative could be LPG, and especially bioLPG. We have provided a study for the German government that switching 3 million heating oil furnaces or heating oil equipments off grid in the rural areas would save immediately, even if you only use fossil LPG, would save immediately 4 million tons of CO2 emission. And if you then add bioLPG to this supply, you will even double or even triple this amount of CO2 reduction. So this is a really, let's say, low-hanging fruit to achieve the CO2 emission targets of the government. And we at least we see some support by the actual heating law, which will be revised in the coming months. But bioLPG is definitely recognized in the German environmental laws as an alternative energy to fulfill environmental benefits, especially the CO2 reduction. So we have, let's say, some positive signs, but we really need to open the door wider. The door is just only a little bit open. We really need to open it up so that bioLPG plays a vital role in the supply of off-grid domestic and commercial customers.
Thanks, Jobst-Dietrich. And so let me go back now to Lizzie German about future production challenges and opportunities as you see them. And so maybe let me ask this rather simple question, Lizzie. Do you think there will be enough renewable or bioLPG available to supply the market in the future? We've heard some projections that this was potentially a growing market. Will there be enough resources to supply this market? And maybe going together with that, what do you think could be the regulatory measures to actually enable this?
Yeah, thanks, Frederic. And I think I first wanted to pick up on the point of Jobst, which was a very good point about the speed with which we need to act, with which we need to decarbonize. And I think putting in new infrastructure for very different fuels takes a long time, whereas the ability to drop into existing customers enables things to happen much more quickly. And there's an opportunity here for governments to pursue both avenues, the faster and the infrastructure change that takes longer to implement. So coming back to a question about the supply, I think the presentation from Eric at the start was extremely valuable, extremely positive about the ability of the industry to meet its fuel needs by 2050. But there is going to be a need to scale up that supply. We don't have the volumes that we need today, but the ability is there to do it. And that's why we are expanding the view of the LPG sector from bioLPG to also include other fuels alongside, such as renewable DME. And focusing particularly on renewable DME, because that's really where Diercks sits. There is a number of different processes that can be used to produce it. So it can be produced immediately by switching the fossil producers of DME. So today, fossil DME is produced in Europe from fossil methanol. If you switch that fossil methanol to renewable methanol, you have an immediate production capacity available in Europe. It's at high purity, it's mostly destined for the chemical sector, but that ability is there to produce. We are focusing our production efforts on scaling up supply of rDME from waste and residue resources, looking at the whole end-to-end process. And they offer the opportunity to get lower cost and also a wider feedstock base to use to produce it. As an example, Diercks is working closely with a gasification company based in England called Q Technology, who have their proprietary gasification technology. We are working with them to build a demo plant, which will be operational the middle of this year, and a first commercial plant in the UK. And there's many opportunities to expand beyond that with more commercial plants across Europe and North America. So there is certainly an opportunity there, and I think, like you say, the policy framework needs to be in place to support it, but the industry is really working hard to make that happen and to realize this opportunity.
Okay, thanks, Lizzie. Same question to you, Beth, Reed. Do you think there'll be enough renewable resources available to supply the market in the future? Where will those come from? And how can policymakers help, in your view?
So I think great words from Lizzie and also Eric earlier in the conversation about the pathways to the production of these renewable liquid gases, in fact, and as then Lizzie has talked about, there are proactive actions in place already to invest in facilities and activities to deliver these molecules beyond the traditional biorefining routes through to, as Lizzie just described, waste recycling to renewable DME. So from what we've heard this morning, I think it's clear that we have the capacity and the know-how and the known technologies to be able to develop and deliver sufficient renewable liquid gases for the needs of our niche market, the off-grid energy market, who will find it so difficult to decarbonize affordably if we're not there to continue to support and invest. And to come to I guess, the heart of the end of your question, what do we need? Well, we need recognition from policymakers. So, for example, the RED III policy amendments that are being debated at the current time, we need to have inclusion for these new renewable liquid gas products within those policies to make them viable and demanded by the member nations that will then put these practices into place. We also need to provide some incentives. The transportation market is quite highly incentivized to be able to adopt renewable fuels. The heating market at the present time, less so. So we need to a certain extent of parity in terms of incentivization to help our end users to adopt these renewable fuels as they are developed and scaled. So those are a couple of areas that I think particularly will help us on our journey that it's very clear we've already started.
Thanks, Beth. Maybe a very quick follow-up about the Renewable Energy Directive. So is bioLPG completely left out of that European directive at the moment, the way it's been redrafted?
I think there are components of the Renewable Energy Directive that point to bioLPG, but as we've talked about this morning, there are many other pathways that are producing renewable liquid gases that may need to be considered as part of that policy reframing.
Okay, Lizzie German, I see you have got your hand raised, so you have the floor.
Yeah, I just want to echo Beth's point, particularly when it comes to renewable DME. There is a pathway in the RED for renewable DME produced from black liquor is the particular pathway that's in there. So I think it's a good precedent to the inclusion of more low carbon gaseous fuels. There is obviously then a translation from the Renewable Energy Directive into national policy, and I think national governments will also need to, as Job said, open the door to a wider range of fuels. It's about the recognition and policies being open to the inclusion of a greater variety of fuel types, because this space is evolving very quickly. And I think policy needs to recognize the speed that we need to act and to make sure that they're open to taking all the different types of low carbon fuels that are available to them.
Thanks, Lizzie. Maria Malmkvist, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that when you talked about black liquor, we have we have quite long history in Sweden with black liquor and how we have developed that. So we have some experience of that, as Lizzie probably already know. And I just wanted to add also that the Swedish government, of course, have a are very into all green alternatives, fossil-free and renewable alternatives. And they have included in given tax exemption both for bioLPG and biogas. So that is sort of a way for the Swedish government to show that all the renewable gases are important to make this change until 2045 that we have set up, both in our roadmap but also for Sweden in total.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear now from the other two speakers, Joël Pedessac and also Jobst-Dietrich Diercks, about your own views on ramping up supply of these fuels. So Joël Pedessac, how do you see that happening in France? It's a big agricultural country, of course. So where will the resources come from in France, and how can the policymakers help? Or maybe they're helping already.
Yes, they are helping already, and of course the situation with Russia and Ukraine make a new situation where the government is looking all the different routes it can use to try to find a solution to replace Russian natural gas. And there is an opportunity for us to look at this biogas we are producing domestically. it's quite difficult today to have easy answer to your question, because a lot of different answers on the table. This is mainly the role of the gas producer to look at this. I think that we have to look to show one thing, to say one thing. There is a big change in the market. Is a situation we are looking to. Is the fact that there is a new player coming in the gas production. The Dimeta is one of these new player. This is important to look at this, and perhaps they will find the new way to speak to the government and to convince them that the DME, the rDME, or the propane could be part of the solution to decarbonize the economy. We have a lot to do. We still have a lot to do to convince our government, and as you know that we will have an election in France in the weeks to come, that the LPG and the bioLPG or the bio-DME could be part of the solution in competition with electricity.
Okay, thanks, Joël. And now briefly to Jobst-Dietrich, Diercks. So same question to you. How can production be ramped up in a country like Germany? I'm talking about renewable and LPG, of course. And how can legislation help in this regard?
Yeah, 2 or 3 remarks to this question. First, the LPG Association Germany is representing traders. We are not producers. And Beth just explained that our industry, to a certain extent, need to, let's say, change its direction from a pure trading company to a more producing or at least investing industry. For Germany, I can only say that the LPG industry is reaching out to RWE, to E.ON, to the biogas industry, to talk to them and to, let's say, raise their interest in investing and producing additional bioLPG, especially rDME. And one argument that we raise towards these possible producers and also towards the politics, this is the second question you posed, is that a large part of the production pathways that Eric gave us at the beginning, especially the rDME production, can be made without hydrogen. If you look at the major big plants, the power to X plants, you can see that they all need a lot amount of hydrogen. And the rDME production from the principal process, you can make it without hydrogen. Yes, you can increase the output with hydrogen, but the basic process is without hydrogen, which is a very, very strong argument for us towards the politics and towards the industry that they should pick up in producing more rDME. So the support that we need is that we get a clear recognition in the energy laws for the future exchange of heating equipments, that solutions beside the electric heat pump are feasible solutions that allow renewable gases together with modern appliances to be part of the energy transition. If this is part of the energy law, then we will have the attraction for investors to go into this market. So we need definitely to convince the politicians on the European level and on the national level that they need to be technology open, that we have different alternatives for our industry. And that is the key. And if we have this, then we will probably have enough bioLPG rDME production in the coming 10 years, I'm very sure.
Okay, thanks, Jobst. And so we've had an interesting discussion with the panelists. Let me give the floor now, before we give and take questions from the audience. I see we have 5 at least now. Before we turn to that, let me first give the floor to Mrs. Rosa Engsted. She's Energy Councillor at the Permanent Representation of Sweden to the EU. Mrs. Engsted, thanks for joining us today. You have prepared an update for us, I think, on the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, which is currently being discussed in the Council. and the role it could play in the promotion of renewable fuels, I understand. So Mrs. Angsted, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frederick. And thank you so much for inviting me to listen and to participate in this event. This is quite inspiring, and I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of going on out there in industry regarding the renewable energy. I don't know if I have an update specifically, but I can try to give you a bit of information, a bit of overview where we're going. And I think it will not be a surprise that we're at this point of time still working towards a council general approach, meaning the member states agreeing on a common approach and waiting in then for the parliament to do the same. And after that, starting so-called trilogues between council, parliament and commission. So at this point of time, we're still discussing it in the council. And I know that this is ongoing debate in European Parliament as well. So where are we now? Now we have a French presidency at this point of time. After that, we have a Czechs taking over from the 1st of July. So French are working very hard into taking different topic areas and revising and negotiating very intensively. We're at this point of time in revision 3 of the directive, and I think some more revisions are to come. And of course, that it's a natural point of of perception that their next step is a general approach in a council meeting, a ministers meeting in the end of July. So that's where we are at this point of time. Now, I was listening very carefully on the general points of the renewable fuels, but also in connection to what we are negotiating, and it's, of course also in perception of the Swedish point of view as I'm representing Sweden in this negotiation file. So my comment is that at this point of time, if I understand correctly, and if my knowledge is well perceived, there are basically 2 types of renewable gases under the Renewable Energy Directive. The first one is biogas, which is based on biomass production, and the other one is a very mysterious, complex concept of renewable fuels of non-biological origin, meaning what we usually, when we negotiate, we talk about hydrogen, but it can mean any other renewable gaseous fuels that are not derived from biomass. So I think at this point of time, if I understand the discussion correctly, there is a concept which already covers and could cover the bioLPG. On other LPG, if it's not renewable, it's very difficult to kind of see how that would integrate. I mean, we can have parallels with hydrogen as well, but I think it's a general perception that it has to be more or less renewable if it has a chance of entering the Renewable Energy Directive. Another aspect, another comment I had, and the thought that I had when I listened to you is, I think there's 2 ways forward, and the one way forward is to try to regulate any new upcoming technologies, or any technologies we have right now in a specific legislative act, and that is risky because we are in such a fast pace, which I'm very glad, to kind of experience, but there can be new technologies upcoming all the time. And that creates a risk of lock-in effects when we try to cover all the technologies under the directive. And therefore, and that what Sweden always promoted is having a functional cover of what we are trying to achieve, and not regulating specific technologies in the directive, and more focusing just on what is the purpose, leaving for other member states, as it is a directive, to choose the most cost-efficient ways forward and most cost-efficient renewable sources of energy to decrease the emissions. I think it's important that we don't lose the sight of the target, which is the emission reduction. And if that can be done with electrification, great. If that cannot be done with electrification, you need other technologies, specific areas in the member states, you use those technologies. So I think that is important to keep flexibility for the member states due to different circumstances and different possibilities. And the last point I wanted to make is also a kind of a 2-way. I'm kind of split it everywhere, I feel, in my intervention or in my comments today. the last point is also, even though you decide to do an overarching regulation based on kind of targets, then the question is, do you have a lot of sub-targets for different areas and different subsectors? For example, as we have right now in the Renewable Energy Directive, we have emission targets, but then we have sub-targets as well. One of those is sub-targets for transport of RFMBOs. So it's or we just focus on the emission target. That's kind of, it's one example, but it's also a point of view. And from our perspective, because member states are in so different phases, and we are really trying in Sweden to be a front runner, to be the innovator, to show the way forward, and to show that it's possible to reach climate neutrality nationally. We're aiming for way beyond, way before 2050. So, and it also means that it's difficult to kind of adapt to new regulatory measures regarding the specific sub-targets connected to specific areas and connected to specific fuels and so on. So also, that's what we're discussing in the council right now, all these kind of options to way forward. It's not an easy debate, because for some member states, sub-targets create investment in incentives. For others, it's a lock-in effect. So it's a difficult discussion, but I just wanted to send those kind of messages with you back home and kind of give a bit of a perspective what we're discussing at this point of time. So I will stop there. Thank you, Fredrik.
Thanks, Rosa Engstedt. So if I understand well, to summarize, regarding renewable LPG, member states seem to be more or less in agreement to have a relatively hands-off approach, regulatory speaking, but including these as part of these renewable fuels of biologic origin.
Yeah. So the question at this point, we're not discussing specific technologies in our negotiations, as that is kind of very hands-on, and that's where kind of I still lack a bit of knowledge from the industry part. And I'm looking forward to just hearing a bit more, is whether they interpret the bioLPG as a part of the so-called renewable fuels of non-biological origin, meaning that it's already covered by the directive, whether that kind of is enough for their interpretation, or whether they see a kind of a need of something else. And at this point of time, when I'm reading it, I think that the definition of RFMBOs, the renewable fuels of non-biological origin, is broad enough to cover it. And if you take the biogas conversion, which was one of the technologies presented in the beginning, so that if biogas is based on biomass, so it's on a biogas under the biogas definition. So bioLPG would be a type of biogas. That's basically the interpretation. And that would, for example, the same interpretation, I don't know if it's good or bad, but the same interpretation would apply if you produce hydrogen based on biogas. You can do that. So that would be also hydrogen based on biogas would be under the biogas definition. And that is something we're still discussing with the Commission and trying to understand whether it's good or bad. But at this point in time, it's kind of the important part from our side is to ensure that we have broad enough definitions that technologies, developing technologies, renewable technologies, could be covered without any additional kind of specific regulatory needs.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosa Engstedt. And I think we've got someone from the audience who would like to take the floor about these regulatory aspects. That's Guido de Wild. Not sure I'm pronouncing the name right. So Guido, you wanted to react from a European Commission policy perspective. I'm not sure if...
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Very
Go
good.
ahead.
Yes, I'm Guido de Wild. I'm working in DG Environment in the Clean Air Unit, and I would like to stimulate the discussion a little bit with my experiences over the past years. For your information, in the Clean Air Unit, I am working on mainstreaming air quality in all EU funding programs. So I think I have quite a good overview of what is happening in research and development, in Horizon, in the LIFE program, in CEF program, Connecting Europe facility, including energy, and especially in ESIF, in the structural funds, which are for operational funds for ERDF, for example, but also for the agricultural sector. Well, based on my experience and our needs, the first comment I would like to say is, please don't always focus on decarbonization. We have big needs, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. We have heating oil and especially coal. There is a big need for energy poverty addressing in Central and Eastern Europe. And all the time, I mean, this group of people that I see today, and I'm listening very carefully, and it is very interesting, but most of you are from Western Europe. Whereas I see that if you want to replace coal, and if you want to contribute to the Just Transition Facility, and if you want to make the transition in Eastern Europe, and if you look at where the rural people are, that is mostly in Central Europe area, where sometimes 25% is still in the countryside and working as a farmer, contrary to Western Europe, where there's only 2 or 3%, then you have big potential and big needs there. And they don't worry that much about decarbonization, but the big driver in Central and Eastern Europe is air quality. People are totally fed up with PM concentrations that are too high, that are causing cancer, that are causing mental diseases. Children cannot play in the schoolyard because of air pollution in wintertime, because there is low stack emissions from all kinds of houses, which still use coal and or dirty biomass, etc. So use this, and don't forget that in the European Green Deal, it's not just decarbonization. It's also about the circular economy. It's also about biodiversity. And now we come to air quality. It is also about a zero pollution ambition. And there you have a driver which is directly related to health. And even people who don't care very much about the climate, and because they don't know about CO2, and they only see CO2 as a feedstock for faster plant growth or whatever, if you have the skeptics, they can understand that PM is bad for the health, that that NO2 is bad for the health, that if you have a granddad or a child that is suffering from asthma, that you don't want air pollution in your neighborhood. So there I would like to say you have a big, strong story for replacing coal and heating oil for the sector. So this is my first point. You can then also link this to national air pollution control programs. You can link this to regional air quality plans. So then you have policy instruments. If you can introduce it there, there's a kind of commitment how to do it. So far, I hardly see anything of this. So if you have a national air pollution control program, that is a program that will basically force the member state to do something about this issue. And then you have, as an industry sector, you have an instrument, you have a solution that you can propose, and then they can integrate it in their targets. We also have targets. We also, like for CO2, in 2025, in 2030, and beyond, we will have air pollution targets. We have national emission ceilings. So how can you contribute to lowering PM emissions if you replace coal and heating oil boilers and heating systems with your system? And it was very interesting to see that you could mix biofuel, bioLPG with solar panels and using existing technology. That is a strong selling point, but you have to sell it in the right quarters and to the right people. If you go, I always tell in the commission myself that if you go to Bulgaria countryside or to Romania side or in Hungary, you will have farms that you can buy for 30,000 euros. You will have your cottage, you will have a roof, and you will have a plot of ground area where you can grow mice and have some chickens and some pigs, etc. Do you really think that these people are going to install a heat pump of 20,000 euros? Forget about it. It's the value of their whole property. So if you then have a stable technology that is proven, that is cheap to install, for which the technology is there, for which the installers are there. They don't have to experiment with technology like heat pumps that they don't know. It's a basic technology. So just think about that in the context of air quality. And that can be at regional level and it can be at national level. Now I come to funding. Now we
Guido de Wild, sorry to interrupt you, but we have just over 10 minutes left, and we have questions also from the audience. So just in one sentence, please.
Yes, I would like to say that you can link this to funding. Why is funding important? From the operational programs and from the common agricultural policy, especially focusing on rural area. And don't forget that rural policy is not just about farmers, it is about people living in the countryside. So also non-farmers could benefit from that. I don't see anything. It is biomethanization, and I don't see bioLPG. And that, I think, is a lost opportunity. So if I can work with the sector, and I'm happy to have a video conference later on to discuss this in more detail, I would be very happy to see how we can work together, because from our point of view, from a policy point of view, but also from the industry point of view, this could be more than just the 3% that you are talking about market share. This is a big opportunity. Another thing is, why do I not see much more in Horizon Europe and in LIFE? Why is this important? If you do European research and pilot and demonstration projects, you increase visibility at an EU level. It's a kind of stamp of approval. And part of it could be funded from Europe. So if you have some ideas as a pilot project for combining renewable, solar, bioLPG, etc., do some projects that can, at EU level, at policy level, you can point to a LIFE project, you can point to a Horizon project, and this will give you far more credibility with people, because they say, it has been selected for LIFE, it has been selected for Horizon. We have conferences. You will feed into the dissemination network of the European Commission. You will be far easier part. The strange thing is that now I talk to energy colleagues, I talk to regio colleagues, I talk to people in agriculture, because that is my role. And they don't know about bioLPG. They think that biogas is the same as biomethane. And I tell them, well, wait a minute, you also, what is LPG? I get as a question. Well, as long as I get from experts and other DGs that kind of question, there is still a lot of work to do. And because of the time, I stop here, but I would like to discuss with you in the panel and with other stakeholders, especially in Eastern Europe, how we can progress this, because now is the time. If the budgets are fixed now till 27, you will have no budget line available to do anything. And that will be, and that is exactly the period where we have to make the transition. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Guido de Wild, for making those comments. I think they're well taken on board by the people at Liquid Gas Europe. So I think you'll be in touch very soon. Let me now turn to questions that were put by our audience. And the first one was a relatively basic question about the drivers and the mechanisms to advance the delivery of renewable gaseous solutions. So what are these drivers? And I think this is a question that we can also address together with another one, which is the parity between renewable gaseous fuels like renewable LPG and bioLPG and other low carbon solutions like electrification. So what policy incentives would be needed to achieve parity between electrification and those kinds of solutions? And so that ties in with the drivers to advance these renewable gas solutions. So who wants to say a word about this? Maybe Eric Johnson?
Sorry, I just need to unmute myself. I think the policy drivers would be pretty similar to the ones that have worked for electricity, decarbonizing, and to a reasonable extent for transport. I mean, there's a number of, the policy is out there, just has not really been applied so much to heating, which is the LPG's biggest, well, and most important market, put it that way. As far as electric versus liquid and all that, I think the simple way I would look at it is that electrification, electricity is really quite good when it comes to mechanical energy, and it has some advantages actually over combustion. But when it comes to heating, combustion tends to be a much better efficient way to deliver that energy. And the other thing I'd say about that specifically is if you start looking at the carbon footprints for heating, if you compare the heat footprint of heat pumps versus bioLPG, actually bioLPG has a lower carbon footprint in most of the EU. And I get the feeling that that's probably not particularly recognized by regulators.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So let me turn to Beth Reed about these questions of drivers, policy drivers and mechanisms, and whether these gaseous or renewable fuels could one day reach parity with electrification.
So reflecting on some of the comments that have been raised previously in the discussion, I would say that from a rural perspective, and I think Mr. De Wilt put it very well. We are talking a great deal about communities that are not of the highest national income averages, and so affordability is really critical. And what I would say in terms of parity is that we know, working on the delivery side, the supply side of both LPG and its renewable versions, that it can be a very affordable solution, perhaps not needing the same investment and support as electrification solutions for the same process or building stock. So in fact, when we talk about parity, I believe actually, for all the reasons we've discussed today, the drop-in nature of the fuels, the ease of ability to convert to a low carbon solution if you're already taking an LPG fuel today, we know that they are, relative to other low carbon solutions such as electrification, affordable. That does not mean we don't need support, but that support may not be as extensive as other low carbon solutions, therefore providing a really good cost of carbon reduction for economies overall. And then when I think about that, and I think about the momentum that we can create with these investments in these fuels, we can really have a significant impact. So that's the way I would think about your question related to parity.
Thanks. And I see Rosa Engsted, maybe you wanted to react on this question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frederick. When we talk about electrification, I think it doesn't matter what you compare it with. I think the fundamental aspect of it that we cannot forget is where the electricity comes from. So electricity per se is, of course, in some cases better than using fossil fuels. But if electricity comes from coal, as you know, as it was mentioned before, it's not really a full solution. So I think when we talk about electrification in cooperation with other technologies, I think the life cycle perspective is absolutely fundamental. So parity comes when you take a life cycle perspective and you see what is the most added value on the lowest cost possible. And here you have different solutions in different member states. So in member states with low emission energy mix for electricity, electrification might be the primary source, or for member states that have already developed district heating and cooling systems, or district heating systems such as Sweden, where the bioLPG has a different perspective, as it already mentioned by Maria. So I think it's important that we don't just look in the end use sector of electrification and define whether that is comparable or combinable with bioLPG, but rather look at the full life cycle perspective. So that was the comment I want to make. Thanks.
Thank you. And let me turn to Maria Malmkvist for this question about the policy mechanism and drivers to advance renewable gaseous solutions and whether they can reach grid parity or not with electrification.
Well, I think Rosa answered it quite well. I think for the drivers for the industry in Sweden is, of course, the goal set by the government until 2045. And we also, the gas business, have a roadmap saying that we will be fossil free in 2045. So the drivers from the industry are very big. So I think the supply of the bioLPG is very important to make this change. And when it comes to the policy, I think within the Fit for 55 regulation and RED 3, it's of course important to be clear that bioLPG is taken into account in that bioLPG get also good possibilities to make this change, because they are needed as all the other alternatives to reach the goal and to do it as fast as possible. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks very much. I was unmuting myself. There was another question coming from the audience, and I think maybe Joël Pedessac could try and answer this one. How important is the role of waste feedstocks or recycled carbon in scaling up renewable gaseous fuels like renewable LPG and renewable DME? Joël Pedessac, I know in France there's a lot of focus on using agricultural waste for these types of applications. So is that something you would see developing going forward?
So as somebody said before, we are not producer. The producer is Total, and I think it's the main issue which is at stake today, because we will have competition between the different entrants of bio product can be used by to produce biogas or whatever biofuels. And we have not the solution. There is a lot of study available on the market which say that we will have enough to produce biogas, biomethane, or even biofuel, bio-liquid fuels, and bioLPG, of course. But I think it's really difficult to say today how it will be managed, because you know that we will not have competition between food and energy, and we have a lot of agriculture to produce produce food, but regarding the energies and other topics, I have not the good answer to this question, because it will be the role of the producer, of a bioenergy producer, to find this the good solution.
Okay, thanks, Joël Pedessac. Maybe Jobst-Dietrich, Diercks, you would like to add something about this, the use of the role of waste feedstocks or recycled carbon in scaling up production?
Yeah, also for me, not easy to give a precise answer, but let me first make one remark regarding the parity, and then I'll return to your question. Because in Germany, I think we should not talk about the parity between heat pump and renewable solutions with the renewable gases for new buildings. Because in the new building sector, we have so high standards for nearly zero emission houses, so that there is no real place for LPG, be it fossil or be it renewable. But our market are the 20 million homes in Germany, which are old, which are older than 15, 20, 30, 50, 60 years. And those houses, they need also to participate in the energy transition. And for those houses, we have the solution. Now coming back to your question, Frederick, what I have heard, or at least read in newspapers, that yes, there is millions of tons of waste that can be used in a kind of circular economy in Germany to produce renewable fuels, which can be then used by Demeter to build a plant in Germany. And I have invited this year already to build the next plant in Germany to show that we will have enough waste in Germany to meet the production volumes that we need. But the total amount in millions of tons, that is not so easy, because from a, let's say, physical point of view, you always have to take into account that if you have 1 ton of waste, you do not get 1 ton of rDME. Yeah, so you have a kind of efficiency loss. Yeah, so 1 ton of waste maybe will produce, I don't know, 600 kilogram of rDME, something like that. So you have a gap that needs to be filled, and this is a very physical, technical thing which I cannot answer actually.
Okay, thanks, Jobst. And we're slowly getting towards the end of our allotted time, so I'll give the floor to Lizzie German, who's got her hand raised. Lizzie.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. I'll be quick on this one, but I think we would strongly support the use of waste feedstocks, all waste, including mixed waste. And I think it's an important point that the legislation needs to be open and supportive to what's currently called recycled carbon fuels in the directive, which is fuels produced from that non-biogenic fraction of the waste. So where you have a mixed waste, there's biogenic and non-biogenic, and the policy needs to be in place to support fuel produced from that mixed waste, because the opportunity is there for domestic feedstocks. Every country in Europe produces waste. Every country in Europe has the ability, therefore, to produce their own fuel. And the policy around that so far has been relatively slow to get adopted through the RED and into national legislation. The UK is kind of leading that, which is one of the reasons why our first of a kind plant will be in the UK, is the supportive policy towards recycled carbon fuels. And I think there is an opportunity there for other countries to also pick that up and make that policy framework clear.
Okay, thanks, Lizzie. I think this wraps up today's roundtable discussion. A big thanks to Liquid Gas Europe for organizing this event. A big thanks as well to our panelists, of course, for your time, and to the online audience as well for following this discussion. I can now hand over the floor back to Maria Malmkvist for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Time flies when you have a great time. The theme for this roundtable is towards 100% renewable gaseous solutions in the off-grid areas. And we have concluded that achieving this is possible until 2050, and that bioLPG and renewable DME are a real game changer. So there is a lot of applications that we have heard of today, and how the applications are used in different countries. And there are also different pathways to the supply of bioLPG and renewable DME. And there are lots of investments going on into these different technologies. We have also talked about the possibility with these gaseous fuels as drop-in solutions, and also to an affordable rate, which is of course very important. Also inclusion of these gaseous fuels in policies and legislations are very important. And of course, Sweden is very happy to have Rosa in Brussels, and she gave a great overview of what is happening in the EU. Renewable DME, as I said, is also important, and here we have a huge potential across European countries. As a lot of both audience and panelists have said today, that all alternatives are needed, and the importance of speed has been raised. Things are happening a lot quicker than anyone thought was possible, and that is, of course, thanks to you all. So with these words, I want to thank you, the engaged audience, the effective moderator, the knowledgeable panelists, and from Liquid Gas Europe's side. And I'm very glad to see the participants are from a lot of different countries. So we are all in this change together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.